Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or afternoon, or evening, whatever time you happen to be accessing this. Welcome to the second of what will be many, many more edition of our grammar lessons via Edpuzzle and video lecture. This is Mr. Costello again, and today we're going to talk about subject-verb agreement. In other words, making sure our nouns grammatically fit their actions, and I'll add states of being. For the sake of trivia, this is ACT standard USG 402 or usage 402, and it will definitely appear on April's ACT. So let's get these skills mastered before we encounter that, shall we? Okay, so first things first. We've got to get some basic vocabulary down. We'll start with subject. The subject of a sentence or clause is the noun or pronoun that performs the primary action in the sentence. So, in the short sentence, Jack ran, the subject is Jack, because Jack is the noun or pronoun which is performing the action run. Pretty simple, right? Let's take a closer look. Let's think back to our previous discussion on nouns. You guys remember this from our last lesson. They are defined as people, places, things, and ideas. Now, I put an asterisk on ideas because this was a little confusing before. Consider how these work as nouns in a sentence, though. Courage, anxiety, knowledge, right? Watch how these work as nouns. Courage was his greatest asset. I felt a lot of anxiety going into my first day of teaching. And, of course, knowledge is power. Notice how each one of those are either objects that someone possesses or even the subject of a sentence performing an action. In the short sentence, knowledge is power. The noun knowledge is actually your subject, but we'll get to identifying that later. So subjects are not just nouns, they're also pronouns. So what about pronouns? Well, they sound similar to nouns, noun versus pronoun, because they are related. A pronoun is a word that replaces a noun, usually when it's referred to a second time. So let's look at a quick example. Ryan had to rush to school because he woke up late. Well, there's our noun right there. That's a person, place, thing, or idea. It's pretty obviously a person, right? The way pronouns work is this he is replacing Ryan. Notice how we'd sound a little bit robotic if we said, Ryan had to rush to school because Ryan woke up late. See how that sounds kind of as far as our composition goes? So pronouns refer to nouns they have replaced. We call these nouns the antecedent of a pronoun. So in this case, Ryan is the noun being replaced by the pronoun he, and the pronoun he, we would say, has an antecedent of Ryan, because it's the noun, the pronoun he is replacing. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. Based on a true story. So, for the sake of being, let's take a longer look at pronouns, since they can also be subjects. Here are some common pronouns. She, it, they. Parts of speech are a bit of a soft spot for a lot of our kiddos in Enid Public Schools, so we may be a little bit behind on this, but maybe we won't be anymore after this discussion. So when Sarah was on stage, she became a different person. Notice how the pronoun she is replacing the noun Sarah. That's how pronouns work. My car was awesome before I wrecked it. Oh, sad face. In this case, the pronoun it is referring back to car, right? See how that works? The car is it. We wouldn't want to say, my car was awesome before I wrecked my car. Huh? So we use it instead of saying car again. And then, if they find out I have a D in math, my parents will kill me. This one's kind of neat because the pronoun actually comes before the noun. So in this case, we have the noun referred to right here with parents. The pronoun actually comes first. This is a composition trick. It's completely allowed, so don't worry. But we do know that they and parents are tied together because parents is a noun. It's the plural people. and they is the pronoun replacing it. Okay, so let's get on to our next vocabulary term that's really important to understanding this process. Verb. So also called a sentence's predicate or simple predicate, the verb is the action or state of being expressed in a sentence. We'll get on the action bit first because it's simple. We'll explain that state of being stuff in just a second, I promise. So in the short sentence, Jack ran, the verb is ran. So previously we had this sentence, we were looking at the subject, the noun or pronoun which performs the verb. In this case, we're looking at the verb, which is the action that Jack performed. So the verb is ran. Pretty simple. So a closer look at some action verbs. Most of the verbs we encounter and are used to examining are action verbs. And for the most part, you're probably already pretty good at this. Action verbs are actions performed by nouns. Go figure, right? Mr. Costello teaches a pretty challenging class. I promise it'll be worth it. Scarlett enjoys being the center of attention. Okay, so notice we have Mr. Costello teaches and Scarlett enjoys. These are both actions, what they are doing. Of all the Avengers, I love Spider-Man the most. So we have Mr. Costello teaches, Scarlett enjoys, and I love. All of these are nice little simple subject-verb formations using action verbs because they're something you do, right? And a side note, given all this MCU and Sony business, obviously I'm quite sad that we may no longer see Spider-Man in Marvel movies. Sad face. I don't feel so good, Tony. Mr. Stark. Whatever. So let's take a look at linking verbs. These guys are a tiny bit different than action verbs, but they still count as verbs, and they still will count in subject-verb agreement. So, as I promised, let's look at that state of being bit. What about that state of being part of our verb definition? Well, that's a reference to what are called linking verbs, which link a subject to a description. Here's how linking verbs work, all right? Mr. Costello is a little fatter than he was last year. Hashtag dadbod. Still, he smells great every day. Truth. Also, his wardrobe choices are top-notch. Okay, so these are all examples of linking verbs, but let's take a closer look at how they're working here. See, this first sentence is linking our subject, Mr. Costello, to a description. Fatter, sad face. In the second sentence, he, our subject, remember pronouns can be subjects, is being linked to great via the linking verb smells. Now, a brief side note, smell can also be an action verb, like he smelled the carpet, right? That's an action there. But if we're linking it to description, the carpet smelled gross, then that's called a linking verb because we're linking our subject to a description that's linking it to a description, simply put. And finally, his wardrobe choices are top-notch. So in these three sentences, we've linked Mr. Costello and fatter, he and great, and choices and top-notch via different linking verbs. So these, we call them state of being because oftentimes he smells great. That's the state of being he's in. It's not an action, it's how he is. Right? Right. Oh, and by the way, yeah, this is how I got a little fatter. I got a kiddo, and then I ate all of the things all the time because, when she ate, I ate, and then when I ate. You know how it is. So let's look at some examples here just to really, really cement this idea of action verbs versus linking verbs. All of them count as verbs, but it's a really good thing to be aware of what you're using when. Okay. And I like to use this right here, do versus be. I like to use that explanation. Action verbs are things you do, whereas linking verbs express how you are. Okay. So action verb examples might be I run after school. Stacy hid in the closet. We had always sat there. And that's a past perfect form. We'll talk about that later. They jumped off the shed. He swam across the pool. I strummed an A chord. We had eaten already. Another past perfect form, verb tense. I will grow up someday. And there's a future tense verb. Now, those are all actions, right? They're expressing what it is that we're doing. However, linking verbs are just as important. All of these, Mr. Costello is handsome. I was asleep by 10 o'clock. I feel wonderful today. They were best friends. She had been a great student. You seem chipper today. The EHS band sounds great. And I was wrong. Takis taste okay. I had some this week, and I got a little bit fatter, and they weren't terrible. So I'll give you that. But notice how these linking verbs all are linking a subject to a description. Mr. Costello and handsome. I and asleep. I wonderful. They and best friends. She and great student. You and chipper. Band and great. And Takis and okay. All of those subjects and descriptions are being linked by what we call linking verbs. So be aware of when those exist, because notice in a lot of these, or really in all of these, there's no action verb there. So you wouldn't be able to identify the verb if you didn't understand how linking verbs worked. Okay. So this, folks, is a little tip on identifying a sentence's subject. Now, in doing my research to prep for this video, to make this slideshow, I always search up things. I always try to find good examples and good supplementary stuff. This explainer was so useful and efficient. I decided to go ahead and just include it in my own little video. So a video within a video, if you will. Let's watch Stephanie here talk to us about how to identify a sentence's subject easily.
All sentences have two things in common. One is that they all have at least one subject and at least one verb. So today I'm going to talk to you about how to find the subject of your sentence. We'll start with the shortest sentence in the Bible for an example. Jesus wept. So if we want to find the subject, which is either a noun or a pronoun, I suggest first finding the verb. They tend to be easier to locate. The verb is the action of the sentence. So here, our action is wept. Now, once we found the action, we need to find our actor. Well, Jesus is the one who is weeping, so he's the actor or the subject. Now, I'll give you another example. That's a simple sentence. It can be a little harder to find the subject when you get into more complex sentences. So here's an example. The crowd cheered for Lady Gaga. Well, let's start by finding our verb. The action here is the word cheered. So who is our actor or the subject? Well, it's the crowd that's cheering. So the crowd cheered for Lady Gaga. The crowd is our subject. It's important to note that although Lady Gaga might be the most interesting part of the sentence, she's not the subject because she's not the one performing the action. So I hope this helps you understand how to identify the subject of your sentence.
All right, gang. Sorry to let somebody else drive there for a minute, but I thought that was really useful, especially when we talk about subject-verb agreement. If you can't identify both subject and verb, it's going to be difficult to make sure they agree, right? So I think that was pretty useful. I hope you guys agree. So, getting subjects and verbs to agree, and how do words agree anyway? What does that mean? Well, let's get into it. What is subject-verb agreement? Well, you know that subjects can be either singular or plural by now. We talked about singular and plural nouns last week, and singular and plural pronouns are pretty much the same way, right? I versus we, or he or she versus them, right? You have singular forms and plural forms. Well, verbs can also be singular or plural. And when they're used together, they have to match forms. Singular goes with singular, plural goes with plural. Now, let me give you some examples so you can see what I mean here. Ryan runs every day after school. Now, I don't yet, but I'm going to start because, aforementioned dad bod and everything. But notice how Ryan is singular and the verb runs goes with a singular noun. Oftentimes, the singular form of a verb will end in S. Just think about it. This is stuff that you've got in your skill set already. Likewise, when we have a plural subject, Harry, Hermione, and Ron, we also have to have a verb form that matches that plural setup. In other words, we have to make run plural. We can't go with runs, right? So notice how Ryan runs matches singular and singular, and Harry, Hermione, and Ron run matches plural, 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 and plural. So that's important to keep in mind, folks. Make sure your subject and verb agree. We'll look a little bit more and practice a bit more on how that works. When we don't have this alignment, this singular with singular and plural with plural, we don't have subject-verb agreement. And the result kind of sounds like caveman speak, to be honest. Jerry liked girls with bangs. That sounds creepy, right? Jerry like? Right? I mean, it's Jerry likes girls with bangs is, that's fine. Jerry, you do you, man. But if you put Jerry like, it almost sounds like Jerry's speaking in the first person even. And Jerry sounds like he maybe likes girls with bangs a little too much. Likewise, if we were to go singular and then go a plural subject with a singular verb form, we have a similar form of disagreement. We hates hobbits. Or, sorry. So notice here, Jerry is singular. Like is singular. Or is for a plural setup. Goodness, sorry guys. Jerry is singular. Like would be for a plural subject. So we have disagreement here. That's why it sounds so strange. We is plural, whereas hates would be for a singular setup. She hates hobbits, right? Oof. Not even Smeagol thinks that sounds good. Oh, wait. No. No. Okay. So let's review right quick before we go any further. Subject. The subject of a sentence or clause is the noun or pronoun that performs the primary action in the clause. In Jack ran, the subject is Jack. Verb, also called a sentence's predicate or simple predicate. The verb is the action or state of being, those are linking verbs, expressed in a sentence. In Jack ran, the verb is simply ran. Finally, subject-verb agreement. Subjects can be plural or singular. Verbs can also be singular or plural. When they're used together, they have to match forms, singular with singular and plural with plural. That's what we mean when we say agreement. So how will this look on the ACT? So it's going to be a little bit more complex perhaps than we've already put it, but don't worry, I'll get you good and prepared. So the ACT rarely places subjects and verbs side by side, right next to each other, like we worked with so far. That would obviously be too easy, right? Instead, they'll often include the subject, then insert some additional information before the verb. So there will be the subject and then maybe an extra little clause or phrase there, and then they will insert the verb after all of that distraction to see if they can throw you off. They want you to assume that the verb should agree with the noun directly before it, so be careful. Long story short, they're seeing if you can find out what noun or pronoun is really performing a verb, even though the construction of the sentence may be deceiving you to think that they're just right next to each other. Let's look at an example of how this works. The songs on Katy Perry's first pop album was controversial. Okay, this is our question. The answer options: A, no change. B, album were. C, albums was. Or D, album is. Let's give this some thought, shall we? So there's our verb, right? There are no other actions or states of being in this sentence. So, as Stephanie told us, we found our verb first. Right there, was. Okay, so now, what was controversial? Was the album controversial? I mean, maybe, but that's not what the sentence is getting at here, right? The album is not the important part. All right, sorry for a momentary interruption there. Had to knock at my door. So, was is our verb here. We're trying to find out what subject is performing that verb. So it's not album. The way the sentence is written is going to make you think it's album. That's how the ACT will try to trick you. As a matter of fact, the subject is songs. It's not that the album was controversial. The songs on Katy Perry's first pop album was controversial. Songs was. Do we have agreement there? Yeah, no, we don't, actually. So, what that leads us to is B. The songs were. Now, I know B by itself, album were, that don't make no sense. That doesn't look good by itself, but when you put it in the full context and you look at the songs were controversial, well, things make a little bit more sense that way. So this is how the ACT functions with subject-verb agreement for the most part. They'll have the subject and the verb and some additional information in the middle, in this case, a prepositional phrase. And they try to throw you off by making you think that this is the subject and therefore needs to match the predicate right here. Nope. This is your subject, this is your verb, and they need to match. There you have it. If you have any questions, don't forget to ask, folks. If you struggle at all whatsoever, make sure you are using all the tools at your disposal. Make sure you're rewatching any parts of the video that you don't understand when you hit the question. Make sure you're asking your teacher, and so on and so forth. All right. We're going to finish up with a little ACT style quiz, still about Katy Perry, and let's see how you do. Don't forget, seek help if you need it.